Innovation is never more valuable than when it's fighting disease. Unfortunately, nearly every person in this room has likely been touched by cancer. Whether you or a loved one is currently fighting the disease, or blessedly, if you are in remission, tragically, if a loved one has lost that battle, pharmaceutical innovation has played a role in your story. 20 years ago, many cancers were an almost certain death sentence. Today, chemotherapy and radiation are far more tolerable and more targeted. New immunotherapies are coming online at an increasing rate, and survivability and quality of life is increasing along with them. In many cases, the type of research that makes this possible is only possible here in the United States. This year, ALEC hosted 9 legislator academies across the country. And for the second year in a row, one of those academies was hosted in Boston, brought together 20 legislators from 18 states to learn about new cures, scientific innovations that made those cures possible. So here to talk to us today about pharmaceutical innovation is Mr. Matt Shaulis. He's the Regional Vice President of Pfizer Oncology, North America. Matt has more than 18 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry, and before joining Pfizer, he spent many of those years with Teva, Cephalon, and Johnson & Johnson. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me and welcome Matt Shaulis.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here with ALEC, and specifically, we're really grateful for this opportunity at Pfizer to have this dialogue with you and encourage the support of free market principles. It's also great to be back here in Nashville. I grew up in a military family, moved all around when I was a kid, and one of the places we lived was up in Clarksville, Tennessee. My dad was serving in the 101st Airborne Division, and quite often we'd come on down here to Nashville. My mom, of course, reminded me just how much I loved Opryland, wanted to know if I was going to be able to get there while here. So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to fit that in, but if I had my druthers, it would always be right here with this group having this conversation than doing something like that. Also, not just growing up in a military family, but also in my career in pharmaceuticals, I've moved around a lot. And as a result, I've lived in Pennsylvania, Alabama, North Carolina, Wisconsin, a bunch of places overseas. I think the bottom line on that is I think I can relate to a lot of your constituents and what their interests are. And one thing I know probably about all of us in the room and your constituents is that we can all relate to cancer. Think for a moment about all the people in your life that have been touched by that grievous illness. I know for me, my mom, who wanted to know if I was going to get to Opryland, is currently suffering from stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. So for me, it's front and center, not only because of work, but also because of my personal life and my family, to really have that commitment to address and battle cancer. And ultimately, my message is pretty simple here. Innovation is right now poised to make a difference in redefining life with cancer. I want to talk through some of the specific ways that we're making progress, working together across multiple stakeholders, not just in the pharmaceutical industry, but in many ways, areas that touch upon your constituents, and then talk about some specific policy areas that are going to continue to support that innovation. So I'll go relatively quickly around addressing, there we go, the significant unmet need in cancer. And I've got on the next slide, there we go, some statistics that show just how grievous this illness is. Now, in the last few decades, we've seen advances in treating heart disease, obesity, diabetes. Americans are living longer. But as they live longer, we're seeing more and more cancer. A couple highlights here show half of men and a third of women will develop cancer in their lifetime. 1 in 8 will get breast cancer. 1 in 7 prostate cancer. I see these numbers. I see the impact on a daily basis. It's staggering. and all of us, including those in the room here, find emotional and psychological problems as a result of their household dealing with cancer. But there's great news. Through the advances of science, in the last 2 decades, we've come to understand the human genome substantially better. This has allowed us to make true progress. And while every day I'm focused on the reality of this grievous disease, everyone at my company and at a number of different stakeholders have this incredible potential to make significant progress and cures. I'll promise you a few things. That's only going to be possible if we continue to support innovation, and something I learned from my mom on a regular basis, and probably that you learned from people in your life that are touched by cancer, it's only going to be possible if we never quit. So let me tell you a little bit more about how that advancement in scientific understanding, by better understanding the human genome, has helped evolve the way that we understand the way that tumors develop. For starters, there's DNA damage and gene mutations that can lead to cancer. There can be loss of just normal regulation within cells. And then, of course, there can be increases or abnormal growth signals inside and outside of cells. Multiple different ways that cancer can develop. A large meta-analysis actually found that that just normal loss of regulation in some cases leads to more cancer than do inherited traits or environmental exposures. So cancer is not always something that can be completely avoided, but it does need to be treated. I also wanted to just briefly touch on how complex cancer can be. This is a cellular map for breast cancer. It shows all the different molecular pathways that cancer could develop. I'm not going to get into any of the specifics of this, but I do want to make an analogy. And the analogy is, think of this as a county map with a bunch of back roads. As we intervene or shut down one of those roads that allows cancer to take over the cell, what does cancer do? It adapts. It finds another back road. It still finds a way to damage the cell and ultimately hurt patients. So our takeaways: cancer is insidious, it's adaptive. Our science, our understanding has got to be faster than that. And that's exactly what the industry has done, what Pfizer has been able to do in working with many other researchers, foundations, other organizations. What happens inside that cell, we've found, is of about equal importance with what happens outside of the cell. And specifically, I'd like to just touch upon the immune system and what we've learned in the last few years about that. We now have a class of drugs called immunotherapies that help treat cancer in cases where the immune system has been slowed down. What we've learned about cancer is that it acts like a cloak or a brake on the human immune system. And this new class of monoclonal antibodies that have been discovered recently and approved by the FDA essentially release that brake that cancer puts on the immune system, and it allows the body's own immune system to then fight that cancer. At Pfizer, one thing we're proud of is the work that we're doing scientifically to advance a whole set of new immunotherapies that not only release the brake on the cancer, but then accelerate the immune system so that it fights the cancer even faster. This is new work, it's risky work, it requires courage, it requires that never quit mentality, but ultimately it has an impact. And you can see with these brain scans on the left what a cross-section of a brain looks like. That white matter is, of course, cancer cells before immunotherapy treatment. And then on the right is a brain scan in the same patient after immunotherapy, substantially less white cancer cells visible. Not only has this been effective at a cellular level, but we've also found that across a host of different tumor types, melanoma, lung, kidney cancers, we're seeing that these new immunotherapies are leading to extending survival, not just killing the cells, but allowing patients to live longer. So right now, with this genomic revolution, this better understanding of the cellular pathways, we've had a strong resurgence in research in cancer medicines. And you can see from 2006 to 2015 a substantial increase in in the number of molecules that are being investigated and developed ultimately to treat cancer. One other thing to point out, a large study found that between 1988 and 2000, about 80 to 90% of the gains in survival across a range of cancers were due to the new medicines. So we see clearly at a societal level that new medicines are making an impact, and it's important for us, of course, to acknowledge that cancer medicines can be expensive. Certainly from our perspective, we think it's important to note that the investment in today's new drugs ultimately leads to generics down the road when they lose their exclusivity. And we think it's a very efficient system for society to have this opportunity to encourage innovation, and then also later to ensure that there's accessibility for patients, which is something our company very strongly believes in. We're also proud of the ways that our commitment to battle cancer has led to new products, 10 new medicines, 7 since 2011, across 9 different types of treatments. And of course, we do our part from an access standpoint. We make copay programs available for patients that would have a difficult time affording them. And in cases where patients can't afford their medicines, we make medicine available for free. But we also have the humility to recognize we can't do it all alone. I really want to focus some of the talk on this. We understand that collaborations may lead to faster and better insights. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see some of the providers, systems, and societies that we partner with. That includes the American Society of Clinical Oncology, MD Anderson, which many of you may be familiar with, and of course, while not on an icon here, Sarah Cannon, right here in the Nashville area. But we also partner with other pharmaceutical companies so that we can accelerate those treatments and work with many different foundations. A common theme here is research across all of these settings. And I also wanted to ensure that you had a clear picture of how extensively our research is conducted across the United States. I think in many cases, there can be a perception that biomedical research or cancer research specifically is really anchored around hotbeds in New Jersey, California, Massachusetts, or North Carolina. This is just a quick map of the research sites for Pfizer alone over the last 3 years. You can see it's extensive, and I think it fits really well with the footprint of many of your constituents. Research work being done by physicians and scientists all across the U.S. is what's driving and fueling this innovation and what continues to need to have a supportive environment. So ultimately, it's the patient impact that matters most. Again, just to touch on some Pfizer highlights, nearly 500,000 patients treated with one of our medicines since 2006. And of course, we're doing our part on access. Over 30,000 uninsured or underinsured patients receiving an extensive number of Pfizer prescriptions. But we understand with our stated goal of redefining life with cancer that it goes beyond just the medicine. Being aggressive about advancing the science, bringing new treatments forward is vitally important. But we also know, and I'm sure you all know from your experiences and your family's experiences with cancer, that it's more than just the treatment. It's also organizing the patient, stealing their hearts, getting them prepared for that battle with cancer. And we have a new program called This is Living with Cancer. It is available to any patient. It has nothing to do with whether they're receiving a Pfizer medicine or not. And it's intended to be a technology-driven solution, online, available on smartphones, that gives them extensive resources to support them in that battle with cancer. Organizationally, it has a calendar. It allows them to get information on their disease. It lets them dictate notes for their next appointment with their physician. But it also does some important things to help them communicate with loved ones and facilitate that support network, which they so much need at this time. There's a social networking capability so that they don't have to send messages and make calls to everyone in their network. They can just plug it right into the network on this app. And it also links them with other resources like nutrition and transportation that, quite frankly, can be very important real-world concerns when patients are battling cancer. So in addition to the medicines and the support for patients, there are other avenues where we can create the right environment to battle cancer. And this is where I'd like to talk about some specific ideas that we'd like you to consider that will support some free market principles and allow us all working together across that different range of stakeholders and make a difference with cancer. Of course, access can become a state issue, and in many cases, some of these issues may come across your desk and appear in some of your agendas. The first that I'd like to talk about on the left-hand side of the slide here is support for policies that allow access to screening and treatment. It's a pretty simple equation, and I think some of this is actually quite common or similar to what some of Senator Green was talking about earlier. When there is earlier screening and earlier treatment, not only does it lead to a better outcome, it also leads to a lower cost because the disease isn't as advanced when there's an intervention. We find that women that are uninsured or underinsured are half as likely to have a mammogram in the last year, and yet at the same time, early detection in breast cancer can reduce death from breast cancer by 38%. Clear evidence that early intervention makes a difference, and the economics follow with that as well. You know, additionally, we are at Pfizer supportive of access for all patients. We believe very much in competitive insurance markets, and we feel that good insurance practices are important. There is one area where we want to ensure that you can at least consider supporting patient access to the treatments that patients and their physicians choose. And this is any kind of legislation that relates to step therapy. And the idea here is that in some cases, insurers will require a patient or a physician to utilize a preferred treatment before using the treatment that they want. And we believe that the medical judgment that a physician uses and the patient's interest in what they think is right for their cancer at that time shouldn't be interfered with. So 15 states already have passed laws that prevent this step therapy technique, and we hope you'll continue to consider that. So I just want to close by saying that we really appreciate this opportunity at Pfizer to continue to partner with ALEC. Free market solutions, we believe, are in society's best interest overall, but we have absolutely seen in the last few decades that they've made a profound difference in battling cancer. Those free market solutions are going to be the way to innovation, and innovation is going to allow us to make better and better progress. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to go home and tell my mom I didn't make it to Opryland, but I know she'll be really pleased that we had this opportunity to have a dialogue about some bigger and more important topics. Thanks so much for your consideration, and once again, I want to commend everyone here on their public service and commitment to free market principles. Thank you.